We are on Kuf Yud Aleph Amud Aleph 111a. 1, 2, 3, 4 lines from the top of the page. In the middle of the line, Amr Reish Lakish. So the Gemoro had concluded yesterday its discussion on zugos, on pairs, consuming food items, drinks, or engaging in activities in pairs. Now, this is an activity that can invite negative spiritual energy with adverse material consequences. And from here, the Gemara goes on to other such behaviors and activities that likewise invite ruach ra'ah, negative spiritual energies that again can have adverse effect on the person. So Amr Reish Lakish. Reish Lakish says, Reish Lakish is of the early generation of the Gemara. So he says, quote, Arba dvarim, there are 4 things, if one engages in those activities, Domai beroishai, literally translated, his blood is on his own head. That's a way of saying that if something were to happen, he's taking his hands in his own life, taking his life in his own hands, taking his life in his own hands. It's a way of saying that if he engages in those and something happens, it was his own doing. Messiah benafshai, and is liable for his own life. You did this to yourself. Yeah, it's a double expression. I think the first is, okay, the consequences are your own. And then the second thing is, when a person does something to endanger his own life, that in of itself means he's like liable for the death penalty for having brought upon himself.
Oh, so he brought it upon himself, and he's also liable for doing it.
Correct. He brought it upon himself, and he's liable for doing so. Good morning, Alan.
Morning.
Morning, Alan.
So what are these that are so dangerous? Elohim, they're as follows. Hanifna, one who relieves himself, goes to the bathroom, relieves himself. We learned this once a while back, yeah. Hanifna ben dekel koisel, one who relieves himself while positioned between a palm tree and a wall. I'm translating literally. I thought a little bit about what these things might mean. I don't have anything, so the floor is open, but let's just learn what it says. So one who relieves himself between a palm tree and a wall. The Gemara is going to qualify each of these 4 things soon. So the first one is one who relieves himself between a palm tree and a wall. Number 2, va'over bein shnei dekolim, one who walks between 2 palm trees. Number 3, hashoyse mayim she'olim, one who drinks borrowed water. And number 4, va'over al mayim shvuchin, one who walks over spilled water. Va'afilu shafachta ishte b'fanav, even if his wife poured the water out in front of him. So it's someone he trusts, and it happened just in front of his eyes. Nonetheless, he shouldn't walk over that water. So those are the 4 things. When leaving oneself between a wall and a palm tree, walking between 2 palm trees, drinking borrowed water, and stepping over spilled water. Those are 4 things that if one did, one invites any negative consequences on themselves. So now the Gemara goes through each of these 4 things and qualifies them. Doesn't explain them, just qualifies them, as in when they are harmful. Doesn't explain why they're harmful, or why exactly these activities have such negative and adverse consequences. The Gemara does not explain that, but just qualifies in terms of when it would apply, when is there room for concern. Namely, the first one, hanifna ben dekel koisel, one who relieves himself between a palm tree and a wall. Qualifier, lo amram, this isn't said, ella only, the less lay arba amos, if there is less than 4 amos, 4 cubits between the wall and the palm tree. As Rashi explains, as Rambam explains, because if it's less than 4 amos, then there isn't any place, any room for the negative spiritual energy to pass through, and therefore it's going to invite damage. But if there is 4 amos, 4 cubits between the wall and the palm tree, so the space is not so tight, less lamba, no concern. This is the halachic thing, actually, that a person's space is 4 cubits. Mm-hmm. So if I take up 4 cubits, then if I'm tight between a wall and a palm tree, then the which is an area that negative spiritual energy hangs out to begin with. So if I'm relieving myself, which is a kind of activity that invites negative spiritual energy, and I'm in that tight space, there's no room for the spiritual energy to come through, so I'm getting damaged. But if there's more than 4 amas, if there's more than 4 cubits, then I take up 4 cubits, and there's still space for the negative spiritual energy to pass through without hurting anybody. Now it continues. Another qualifier. And even if there's less than 4 cubits, in which case there isn't enough space for the negative spiritual energy to pass through, and therefore it would invite negative consequences upon the person who's believing himself in this tight space between the wall and the palm tree.
Oh, I thought it was if there was more, it would harm you.
No, if there's more, there's no issue, because then it can pass through, no problem. If there's less, then there is an issue, because it's going to hit you on its way.
Oh, okay. Read it backwards. Okay.
Right? Now, even if you don't have 4 amas, so it's too tight, and now it's going to hit you on the way, this is not said Ella only, if there's no other path. Meaning, if there's another way, so this person is believing himself between a wall and a palm tree, and there's less than 4 cubits, but there's another route that the negative spiritual energy can take, then there's no problem. But if there's another route, another way to get through that space.
Yeah, like if it was a wall, a palm tree and a wall.
Let's just say, a wall, a palm tree, and a wall. So you're between one wall and the palm tree, even though it's less than 4 cubits, which would mean there's not enough space for the negative spiritual energy to get through. But because there's another route, it'll go the other route.
Right.
Less lamba, and therefore there's no concern. So this is the first item as the qualifiers. The first one is relieving oneself between a wall and a palm tree. And that's only a problem if A, there is less than 4 cubits, and B, there's no other way for this negative spiritual energy to pass through, and therefore it's inevitably going to hit you and hurt you. Okay? Item number 1. We're going to see soon there's other issues with palm tree and inviting negative spiritual energy, and we also had it before in the story with the guy who was jealous drunkard.
He blew up.
He blew up by a palm tree. So there's something about palm tree and it's
Negative.
And it's negative. Yeah. Simultaneously. Simultaneously, elsewhere the Gemara actually talks about palm tree in the positive. First of all, there's the pasuk Tzaddik Katomar Yifrach. Tzaddik Katomar Yifrach. The righteous grow like a palm tree. In the positive. Likewise, we have this idea that the palm tree, the date tree, well, not a palm tree, it's a date tree, but it's similar, date palm specifically, takes 70 years to produce its fruit. And the Gemara speaks about in the positive how the old person was planting a palm tree, and someone asked him, "You're not going to see the fruits," and he said, "Well, someone planted for me to see the fruits, so I'm going to plant it for someone else to see the fruits in the next generation." So it's like a symbol of an older generation working for another generation, the next generation. So there is a positive symbol about the palm tree, but yet here, maybe it's specifically a date palm tree that has the negative positive. Maybe that's what it is. A palm tree that doesn't produce dates is kind of a negative in that it just takes, doesn't give.
Well, what about coconuts?
What? Okay. I don't know. Maybe the date palm specifically is the positive in the sense that it doesn't just take, it also produces.
Yeah.
Whereas klipa, the negative, is that which just takes. Right? We spoke about this with respect to the waste, and relieving oneself in the past. That relieving oneself is a symbol of klipa, because it doesn't produce any good nutrients. It's just siphoning off healthy nutrients and producing itself in a waste sort of fashion. Maybe palm tree without fruit has a similar kind of meaning, where it's like a tree but doesn't produce anything. I don't know. I'm just suggesting. I don't know if someone has any other suggestion.
Maybe they just coexist.
Sorry?
Maybe they just coexist. The negative and the positive. It's the timing and the manner with
right. That's always the case. Yeah.
Used.
Especially in our world, it's all a question of usage
and context.
Right. So right, exactly. So most of there are some things in the world where God says don't touch those, as are forbidden. So there's a klipa that one cannot engage with, non-kosher food and so on. Non-kosher food, non-kosher behavior.
Right,
but then there is most of the world is one way or the other.
Noiga, right?
Klipas noiga, where it's capable of being used in the positive or negative. And sometimes the more powerful the negative it can do is also the more powerful the positive can do. It's often the case. Something which is full of energy.
So it's like all lowers at the most.
Yeah. The most common example is the animal soul. The animal soul, the more passionate it is, and it's engaging in animalistic behavior, the more potential it has to be passionate for God, right? So maybe that's the palm tree symbol,
that's the paradox.
where it could be,
In a
and
nutshell,
it could be completely
no fun.
right. It could be completely negative or positive. I don't know. Anyway, so this was item number one: not to relieve oneself between a wall and a palm tree, and that's only a concern when there's no space for the negative energy to come through, either through another path or because there's less than 4 cubits. But if there's another path or it's more than a few cubits, no problem. The negative energy can pass through without
That's
hurting.
a whole discussion in and of itself. What does that mean?
What does that mean? Space for the negative energy to pass through.
Maybe it's like the Egla Rufa.
Like, what if we have to acknowledge it and give it its due and push it out?
But not anymore.
If you're filling up the whole space, then it's gonna hurt you. But if you are not filling up the whole space metaphorically,
Ego.
and allowing the negative to pass through without getting caught up in it, it doesn't hurt you.
Getting harmed.
Sometimes your ego actually invites more negative, right? Because like a person wants to say, I'm not bad, I'm good. And ends up actually eating them up even more, rather than making space for the negativity to pass through. Good point. Could be an element here.
So does that mean you can't get into a crowded elevator?
There's no palm trees in elevators, so I think you're okay.
No.
Unless in Florida.
So the palm tree brings a negative.
Sorry?
So it's the palm tree that brings in the negative
Something apparently.
effect.
Specifically here, relieving oneself, like going to the bathroom, between a wall and a palm tree.
I don't think anybody's relieving themselves in the elevator.
Right. Well, maybe somewhere in Florida you have decorative bathrooms with palm trees on some resort. I don't know. And maybe you can be stuck between a wall and a palm tree. That's a possibility.
Maybe that's being stuck between a wall and a hard place. Maybe that's really.
I don't know. Okay. Item number 2, which was invites negative spiritual energy, is a Oiver ben Shnei Dekalim, one who walks between 2 palm trees. That was number 2, walking between 2 palm trees. So says the Gemara, Lai Amran, this concern of walking between 2 palm trees and in that way inviting negative spiritual energy is not said Ella only, if there's no public thoroughfare going between. So it's a private area. It's a private area. There's no people coming and going, and you're walking alone between 2 palm trees. Then there's a concern. But if there's a public thoroughfare between, less lamba, no concern. Apparently, the negative spiritual energy is too afraid to attack when there's a public. So it only attacks when it's a private. So if there's two palm trees you're walking through, and it's in private, it's one's alone, then there's the fear of attack. If it's in public, then it's too afraid and doesn't attack. And therefore, in public thoroughfares and boulevards in Florida, where you have Palm Beach, you have palm trees, no worries walking through because it's public space.
Would that imply a certain minimal distance, right? Because even a thoroughfare like 16.
I don't. Rashbam doesn't make any such comment.
No, it
Does not.
It doesn't have to be, I guess.
Doesn't make such comment. Although I will add that, actually connecting to today's Hayom Yom about Hasidim being a family and the importance of that. So there's this idea that when one's fighting one's own evil inclination, it's always best to invite someone else to help. And the Hasidic teaching goes like this: an animal soul is selfish. So my animal soul has no concern with your behavior. It's only concerned with my behavior because it's selfish. My godly soul is altruistic and is concerned with you. So when 2 Jews sit together, the saying goes, it's 2 godly souls against 1 animal soul. Right? Because my friend cares for me and my good. My godly soul cares for me and my good. That's 2 against my own singular selfishness. So maybe there's something about the public thoroughfare that keeps negative away, in the sense that when I'm with friends and I'm with others and I'm fighting negativity with others, it's much less likely that I'll be attacked by that which is negative. Comes outnumbered. The expression in Rashbam is, it's too afraid to steal from the public. It's hard for an animal soul to chap an aveda, to grab a sin, when a person's amongst friends who care for him. When a person's alone, then the animal soul can say, you're alone anyway, it doesn't matter, do what you want. Then negativity can come. But when a person's in a public thoroughfare, I'm not sure what the meaning of between two palm trees are. I don't know how between two palm trees. We'll still have to figure that out and what the meaning of palm trees are. But a palm tree obviously signifying a person's going through some difficulty that would invite negativity. The best way to deal with that is be amongst friends. Be in the public. If a person's alone. That's the first. It's an invitation for all kinds of negativity and self-doubt and sadness and depression and self-wallowing and pity and so on. When a person's with others, there's less of a concern. And maybe that's reflected here in the statement that walking through two palm trees is only of concern when a person is alone. But if there's a public thoroughfare, then walking between two palm trees is not a problem. Okay, item number 3 and its qualifiers. Hashoy Samayim She'olamonu drinks borrowed water. Says the Gemoro, Lo Yomra, this is not a concern. Ella only the Shailinu Katan, when he borrowed it from a child. Aval Gadol, but if he borrowed it from an adult, less lamba, no concern. Moreover, Afilu Shailinu Katan, even if you borrowed water from a child, from a minor, Namalei Yomra, it's also no concern. Ella only Bisada in the field. To Loi Shchichi, where there's no water available, and therefore the negative spiritual energy wanting that water will hurt you. Aval Be'ir, but in the city, the Shchichi, where plenty of water available, less lamba, no concern. Furthermore, I feel besada even in a field. Namile Amran, there also is no concern. Ella Maya, if it's water. Abachama Vashikra, but you're talking about wine or beer, less lamba, no concern, because the negative energy is not interested. So let's look at this on a literal level. The third item was drinking borrowed water invites negative spiritual energy. What's the qualifiers? Number 1, it's only a concern if you borrow from a minor, not from an adult. B, it's only a concern when you borrow from a minor in a field where not much water is available, and therefore the negative spiritual energy is going to try to drink from it and thus harm you. And it's specifically water, but the negative spiritual energy has no interest in wine or beer. That's what it says here.
It sounds like a snake.
So what's this? It sounds like a snake, yeah. Okay, so what's the story here? Maybe, borrowing from what you said yesterday, Yeshua, water symbolizing Torah.
Mm-hmm.
Borrowed Torah, right? Drinking borrowed water. Borrowed Torah. That's no good. It's got to be your own. It's got to be your own. You have to have your own Torah. The Torah's got to be yours.
Yeah.
Not borrowed. Right? The whole idea of learning Torah is that one imbibe it and one internalize it. And therefore, borrowed water, not good enough.
It has no value to the person who borrowed it.
That's right. Unless you're borrowing from an adult, from a gadol, someone greater than you. So someone greater than you, who is a good teacher and a good master, then borrowing from their water, that can work. Right? That can work. Because when you're borrowing, when you're borrowing from a gadol, you're borrowing from someone who's greater than you, then you can indeed imbibe it. If you're borrowing from a minor, you're borrowing not literally from a minor, but you're borrowing from someone who knows less than you, right? It's like
right, you may be getting the wrong lesson.
Like the famous teaching in Hayom Yom, or a different way to, one is you may be getting the wrong lessons, number 1. Number 2, another thing is perhaps there's something like when it comes to material wealth, you look at people that are lower than you and say, wow, look at what I have. And when it comes to spiritual wealth, you look at people who are greater than you and you say, well, I wish I can have that. Pushing upward, right? So if you're going to borrow Torah, borrow up, not down, right? And then if you're going to borrow down, only do so in the city where there's plenty of water, where there's lots of Torah going on, and people are sharing this way and that way. And then you can learn from anybody. But if you're out if the only place you're getting water from is from the lower level, from the minor, that's the only inspiration you're taking, no good. If it's coming from a lower level. Unless that lower level is wine and beer. It's the inner dimension of Torah, the spiritual dimension of Torah. And if it's a spiritual dimension of Torah, it could be inspiration from anyone and from anywhere, even from someone at a lower level.
Because there's so many interpretations, you can come to your own.
Sometimes a person can be inspired on a spiritual sense from a person who's not necessarily smarter than them, or not necessarily knows more Torah than them. But for a spiritual connection and inspiration, for wine and beer, even someone at a lower level can give that inspiration. Water, to imbibe Torah on a regular, steady diet of water, that's got to be either A, from someone greater than you, that way you can borrow up, or in a city where lots of water is being shared, where lots of Torah is being shared, and you're kind of part of this culture of Torah learning and Torah sharing and Torah drinking.
Because the one who's less than you in terms of scholarship may have gotten information from somebody who.
Either that, or it's not going to be any growth. If you're borrowing down, there's no growth. If you're borrowing up, there's growth. You know, it's like there's like this joke that two people call the same thing by different names, depending if you're rich or poor. If you're poor, you call it debt, and if you're rich, you call it leverage. Right? You call it. So if you're borrowing up, good, you're going to grow. You're borrowing down, you're just losing out. Right? Unless, of course, everybody's sharing with everybody. You're in a city where there's lots of water moving around, or you're taking inspiration, spiritual inspiration, wine and beer, in which case, take from anybody. Perhaps. Okay, then. Okay, that was the third item. The third item was borrowing water, drinking borrowed water, the qualifiers. The qualifiers being that drinking borrowed water is only an issue if it is, number one, water, number two, from a child, number three, out in the field. The fourth item that invited negative spiritual energy is over al mayim shvuchim, one who steps over poured water, spilt water. Here are the qualifiers. Number one, loy amran, this is no concern, ella only, the loy afsikenu ba'afra, v'loy taf b'hu roika. If there's no earth sprinkled on it, or spit, saliva spent into it. Avla sikenu afra or taf b'hu roika, less number. But if there's dirt poured on it, or some saliva spit into it, then no concern, you can walk over that water. Additionally, like Amran, it's not said, Ella, there's no concern with stepping over water, Ella Deloy over Lay Shimsha. If it's water poured that day and the day has literally, the sun hasn't set on it. It hasn't been it's not the next day yet. Number one. Number two.
So in other words,
so
if it's only dangerous if the
sun hasn't set yet.
If it hasn't
set yet, only if it's that day.
Oh.
Additionally, the Lay overlay Shisin Nigri, and 60 feet haven't walked over it yet. Meaning it hasn't been trampled on by a bunch of people. But if the day passed, or 60 feet walked over it, less lamba, no concern.
That's funny they use the word number 60. Like that's the.
Oh, I'm going to talk about that in a second. I think I'm going to talk about it in a second. V'loy amran as well, there's no concern. Ella only. If he isn't. Oh, there's also no concern if he's not riding on it's a triple negative. If he's not riding on a donkey or wearing shoes, meaning, but if he's riding on a donkey and he's wearing shoes, less lamba, no concern. So what are the qualifiers? Okay, so the fourth item was walking over water. Walking over spilt water is inviting negative spiritual energy. Only if A, no water was poured in it, B, no one spit into it, C, it hasn't passed the day yet. D, a bunch of people haven't walked over it. And E, you're going barefoot and without riding a donkey. So only if you're going barefoot, not riding a donkey, it hasn't passed 24 hours, nobody else walked on it, no water, no spit is in it, and no earth is in it, then there's a problem with walking over that water. Now, Hanimili, when are these qualifiers capable of protecting you? If there's earth, if there's a spit, if you're riding a donkey, if you're wearing shoes, if the day has passed, and so on. In such a place where there's no concern with witchcraft or witches. But if there is a concern for witches, even if you're aware, even if you have all these qualifiers, it's the next day, someone poured earth onto it, someone spit into it, 60 people walked through it, you're wearing shoes, you're riding a donkey, but because there's a witchcraft here, it's still going to be a negative spiritual energy if you walked over that spilled water.
Kind of like the story about the Zuzos.
That's correct. We are concerned.
Blew up.
And indeed, the Gemoro gives a story here. Ahu Gava, there was such an individual, the Rachav Chamra B'Sai Misani, he was riding a donkey, and wearing shoes, the Gomed Misanev Itzavi Kare, and his shoes, I think, withered, and his knees or his feet dried up. End Gemara's discussion.
So that was the harm that befell him was the
Yes, his withered shoes and his
withered shoes and knees.
yes. So perhaps water again is Torah.
Yeah.
Spilled water.
Wasted Torah.
Oh, what does wasted Torah mean? So perhaps wasted Torah means you have sometimes. Actually, it actually comes up in the Basi Legane Maimon, right? There's the discourses that are related to the 10th of Shvat that everyone would say every year. And part of the theme of this year and last year is this idea of someone who misappropriates Torah. Because he's so intellectual, he's smart, and pursues the study of Torah in this intellectual manner, he's capable of misconstruing Torah logic to actually come to a conclusion that's opposite of Torah. The Gemara says this, that a person can, he's a mayor who was so smart, he was able to find a bunch of reasons to say that a sheretz, which is one of the most impure of objects, to be pure. Meaning logic can go all kinds of directions. And rationalizations a person can find everywhere. So misappropriated Torah is using Torah to rationalize misbehavior. Classic example.
This is also heretical.
Right.
Heresy.
Heresy, where someone uses Torah itself logic.
Using Torah to teach heretical.
Teach heretical ideas. Or another classic example is a person who's yelling at someone else. And he rationalizes it by saying, I'm correcting him. When in reality, all he's doing is just expressing his own anger.
And using Torah.
Or his own hate. But he's using Torah as a medium to beat someone else up. Verbally. So he's misappropriating Torah. It's spilt water. So you can't walk over that. You got to stay away from it. What's the antidote to misappropriated Torah? Humility. A person approaches Torah not with the rationale of, I'm smart, but this is God's Torah. With a little humility, it says this is God's Torah, then he doesn't misappropriate Torah. Because to begin with, the foundation is humility. And that's perhaps reflected by the idea of earth, the idea of waiting for the next day. There's a patience involved in that. The idea of people trampling over it. It's different forms, perhaps, of humility, or even spit into it, as it doesn't get embarrassed by being corrected.
How do you fit in the witchcraft piece to this?
Oh, so if I'm going to learn from someone else who has this, so either the water itself has to be tempered with humility, or I have to be protected. If I'm learning from someone else who is very smart and therefore does a good, like for example, a mayor, the same mayor, he would learn from someone called Acherim, Elisha ben Avuya, a person who was a big scholar and went off the way.
Yeah.
And most sages didn't learn from him because it was misappropriated Torah. But the mayor had this ability, he had this protection, he was able to take the good and leave the negative. Right. So either the person teaching the Torah, the water itself has to be corrected by adding a level of humility, or the listener, the one who's walking over, has to protect himself by being on a donkey and wearing shoes. Unless there's malicious intent. There's a witchcraft. If there's malicious intent, protecting yourself ain't gonna help. Stay away. So if you're the water, right? The water itself, the Torah itself that's being spilled, that's being misappropriated. The way to deal with that is humility, waiting the day, the earth, the spit, people trampling over it. But if you're nonetheless going to walk over it, meaning someone who hasn't fixed their water, their Torah is not fixed, the Torah is being misappropriated, and I want to learn from it, I want to walk over it, I got to be protected. My donkey and my shoes, I have to be able to know how to take what is right and that which is not right. Unless there's witchcraft here, unless there's malicious intent. If there's malicious intent, stay away. Because inevitably, my shoes are going to dry up, my feet are going to wither. My behavior is going to be, we say, we don't want our feet to falter.
It almost sounds like the story of the snake, where he lost his ability to talk. Among other things, as sort of an allusion to he misappropriated
Cunning. Yeah.
Torah
Oh,
gifts.
exactly. The snake, which had cunning,
Yeah,
misappropriated its
Torah
cunning, and what did it lose? It lose the lost ability to walk properly.
gifts. He misappropriated in a malicious way.
And what's his tikkun? Eats the earth.
The earth,
Has to
the
be
dust
humbled.
of the earth.
Got to be humbled. Because humility is the antidote to shrewd cleverness that becomes misappropriated.
Dust, meaning putting the dust over the water.
Over the water, yeah. And people trampling on him.
Mhm.
People trampling on him. Similar thing.
He bites only the heel.
That's right. It's forced into humility. Because that's the antidote to, it's very easy to rationalize oneself all kinds of directions. And if a person lacks humility, you can end up in all kinds of terrible places, all with the cloak of Torah and say, look, I'm figured it out. I understand. I'm smart. It's got to be humble. And when one learns from someone that lacks that kind of humility, one has to be very, very well protected. And if not, especially if there's malicious intent on the part of the person teaching, then you're in big trouble. You got to stay away from that.
Yeah.
Again, all suggested reading that I'm kind of thinking out loud along with you. And the floor is open for other interpretation beyond its literal meaning
I was thinking
of
about
walking
the
over water
story of,
literally.
Rabbi Meir and Rabbi
Acherim.
Yehuda.
Yeah,
Right, they were walking and discussing Torah, and then
correct.
I think Rabbi Meir indicated that
The Acherim indicated to him
you're almost at the point of the
he was walking along Elisha ben Avoyo. He's riding a horse on Shabbos.
and he said it was almost he
told him, you gotta stop
notified him
walking
that
here.
It was almost time, like you're almost passing the
That's cool.
tchum.
That's correct. Yeah, that's right.
He was able to
That's right.
keep his own halakhic boundaries without.
Even as he's learning from someone who completely is different.
He didn't get so consumed that
That's
he
correct.
forgot about his halakhic standing.
That's correct. So someone and indeed the sages said only the mayor can do it. The rest of us
Right.
shouldn't be able to do that.
You could
He had
easily get
the
absorbed in
donkey
Torah.
and shoes. He had the protection to be able to handle it. And there was no malicious intent on
You're
Elisha ben
gonna tell
Avoyo's part.
someone who's a giant in Torah, oh, I can't go any further. I mean,
Yep.
Yeah. Insulting.
Okay, wonderful day, Yidden. With Hashem's help, on Monday we continue with more comments of this type, of appropriate behaviors, and inviting negative spiritual energy and how to avoid that and so on. So we still have more to go on this whole discussion.
Right.
A wonderful day, Yidden.
Yeah.
Alan, we'll be in touch soon. I think he left already.